I'm hoping it'll be very relevant to people in the room who care about IT and who read all the time about how they are killing their children's futures, robots are going to be doing everything. I'm going to correct a lot of those ideas. I'm afraid I'm going to be rather old school, working for a print newspaper. I'm reading from pieces of paper. Good evening, everyone. I am indeed Caroline Daniel, and I edit the Weekend Financial Times. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, given that my talk is about history. I was born to a father who was in the military and a grandfather who was headmaster of a boys' school. So both men who understood the importance of power, particularly over me. At the height of the Cold War, my father was asked to go to the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C. He was involved in a super-secret squirrel project, which involved calculating how long it would take the Russians to invade Western Germany. This is a real story. Obviously, because I work for the Financial Times, we do deal in real stories. So his team took over the entire defense computer network overnight. They were given it from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It probably was the size of a vast ship then. They spent hours inputting airports, train lines, details of infantry divisions from giant punch cards. After more than 10 hours of computing, there was still no report. At daybreak, they were anxious and running out of time, and biscuits. The US military was due back and wanted to have their computer system back. Thankfully, just before 7 a.m., the computer came back with an answer. It would take 17 hours and 20 minutes for the Russian troops to mass on the German border. Apparently, my dad said that back in Britain, the same process would have taken 18 months to do by hand. By then, the Russians would have probably have invaded many times. So that, as a toddler, was my first brush with technology and how it could impact our society. I'm going to fast forward to technology now. What do newspapers have to say about it? So I've looked at some recent headlines, and I'm afraid to say they're rather apocalyptic. So here's some from my own newspaper, the FT. The rise of the robots threatens the poor. Here's a slightly more optimistic one. Cheer up, the post-human era is dawning. I'm not sure if robots are going to be buying newspapers, but I hope they will. What about that other great British institution, the Daily Mail? Here's what I found online in just 1 week. The first robo-farm to open in Japan. Checking Facebook and Twitter during the day could ruin your chances of a good night's sleep. The iPad is a far bigger threat to our children than anyone realizes. Could ISIS start printing their own 3D weapons? Robots will take 11 million jobs by 2036. Thankfully, there was one optimistic article. Do you fear a world run by robots? It asked. Don't worry, they can't even assemble IKEA furniture. So that's obviously the AI test we need is the IKEA furniture test, not Turing. So how should we make sense of the challenges posed by technology? Are you in this room killing off your children's prospects? And what are the lessons from history? Behind the headlines, there is a serious discussion underway. I think of all the social issues right now, the biggest is the impact of technology on jobs. It was a major theme of the FT's Business Book of the Year recently, which was won by a book called, not surprisingly, The Rise of the Robots. It was only the second time a book on tech had won in 15 years at the FT. I think that's probably because we've been so busy attacking bankers rather than technologists. Tech and jobs was the biggest theme at Davos this year, amid the snow, champagne, and Leonardo DiCaprio. Thankfully, the only bears attacking the actor were financial market ones. The Davos tone was set by the launch of an amazing and unwieldy report. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it was called The Future of Jobs, Employment, Skills, and Workforce Strategy for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Anyone read it yet? Anyone going to rush out and buy that report? Not so many. Anyway, it was quite a mouthful, and Davos warned that advances in robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotech, 3D printing, and biotech would lead to a loss of over 5 million jobs by the end of 2020. It added gloomily that this prediction was relatively conservative. Even boring central bankers are starting to compete on how to be super pessimistic about tech. Last year, the head of the Italian central bank warned of job losses for half the workforce because of tech. Here in the UK, Andy Haldane, chief economist at the Bank of England, warned that 15 million UK jobs are at risk from automation. He was saying that new technologies do not just now threaten manual jobs, but as we've just heard, cognitive ones as well, from legal services to accounting. He also joked that he didn't expect his hair to be cut by a robot anytime soon. But I looked him up online, and he's got a terrible buzz-cut hairstyle, so I think his hair is being cut by a robot. Or it might even do a better job. The BBC has fueled these kind of fears about, what's happening with jobs. I don't know how many of you looked at there. There's an interactive graphic online where you can type your job in to find out the risk of automation. I can see someone nodding in the room. In the next 2 decades. So I was a bit nervous, and I did it for my own job as a newspaper editor. Thankfully, there's only an 8% chance of my job being automated, but 8% still seems quite high to me. And I checked out some of your jobs in the room as well. So IT specialists, you face a 22% chance of automation in the next 2 decades. Do you want to know who's least at risk? Here's a good guess. Those least at risk are publicans. So those at the back, you'll be fine serving the drinks. So at least there's a future selling alcohol to those made jobless by the robots. So go and buy those cheap pubs which are for sale. However, I do think this media-led tech anxiety is getting worse. And I'd be interested to know how many of you in the room think it might be. If you can put your hands up. So a few. So I was curious about that as well. I looked it up on our media database, which tracks how many articles were written on different subjects. And I typed in robots and jobs. So 10 years ago, there were 937 articles that year. By 2014, there were over 4,000 articles on the subject. Last year, it doubled again to 8,000 articles. And this year, we're on track to hit over 30,000 articles about robots and jobs. So it's clear there's a growing media frenzy about this kind of issue. And I don't think any of you in this room can afford to ignore this debate. But there is some good news. Fears about tech and jobs, as we all know, are not new. We've all heard about the Luddites who smashed weaving machines. In the Great Depression, John Maynard Keynes forecast that technological progress would allow all of us to have a wonderful 15-hour work week and abundant leisure by 2030. Clearly, we're at that moment, but maybe we would be if we lived in socialist France. In America, in the 1930s, President Herbert Hoover received a letter warning that industrial technology was a Frankenstein's monster, threatening to devour civilization. Guess who sent the letter? Very quiet guessing room here. It was the mayor of Palo Alto. Quite a change from now. Fast forward to the 1960s. Here is Time magazine from JFK's presidency in 1961, and it's a quote. In the past, new industries hired far more people than those they put out of business, it said. But this is not true of many of today's new tech industries. Doesn't that sound a bit like Andy Haldane today? I think it does. Again, in 1963, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, received a gloomy letter from scientists warning about the cyber nation revolution and how it would create a separate nation of the poor, the jobless, and the unskilled. In fact, fears ran so high, he created a presidential commission to look into it. And I have a confession here, politicians love technology commissions. And I know that for a fact, because I was a young researcher for Gordon Brown in the glory days of 1994 in the rise of New Labour. And I'm afraid it was called Building the Information Superhighway in the days before it was called the Internet, which does make me feel very old. So were they right to be worried? Should we really be crying robot? This is where it gets quite interesting. So there is actually an astonishing mismatch between the fear of automation and the actual reality. There's a finding from David Autor, an economics professor at MIT, who concluded that the commission in 1964 found that tech did not eliminate employment. In fact, it eliminates jobs, but not work. I think that's a really interesting and important distinction. During the wave of automation in the 1960s, employment actually held up really well because new jobs replaced old ones. In fact, the employment rate in the UK right now is roughly the same as it was in the 19th century. That's despite all our technology advances. The current jobless rate is just 5%, again, despite all this robot-destroying jobs that we're reading about. Last August, there was a great Deloitte report. I don't say that very often. Like the earlier 1964 commission, it concluded that technology had been a job-creating machine. It went back to census data from the last 140 years, back to 1871. And it showed that the fall in the number of jobs in agriculture and manufacturing were offset easily by rises in jobs in caring, creative, tech, and business services. Of course, there have been changes in the kinds of jobs which have been created. In 1901, there were 200,000 people employed to wash clothes by hand. I'm glad I wasn't one of them. There has been one at least unwelcome change in jobs. In 1871, there were a mere 9,000 accountants in the UK. Now, there are over 215,000 accountants. So, happy tax returns. In the last 15 years, when computers have experienced their most rapid growth, the size of the American workforce has expanded by another 20 million people. So something funny is going on. But I still want to ask again, why are we really at an inflection point? We hear all the time, this time it's different, this is a new wave of technology, it is going to be profoundly different. And those who argue that point to things like Moore's law and the rapid changes in computing power, which everyone in the room knows about. And I was given a brilliant way to understand the pace of that change in computing. And this is the fact, is if we'd seen the same rapid advancements in computing power, if we'd applied those to air travel, guess how long it would take to fly from Sydney to the UK right now?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, well, that's 15 minutes. Do we have an advanced one? We had 5 minutes over there. Is that the lowest? 30 seconds is really good. It's 8 seconds. Isn't that amazing? That's a great way to understand, to sort of tell someone who's not a tech person how unbelievably fast computing power has processed. Last year, I interviewed Mr. Singularity himself, Ray Kurzweil. How many of you in this room are of Ray Kurzweil? Okay, he's the founder of the Singularity. He believes he can live forever. He has 250 pills every day, every single day. And he thinks he can bring his father back as an avatar. I had the most bizarre breakfast ever with him. So it was smoked salmon, dark chocolate, horrible porridge. Never go and have breakfast with Ray Kurzweil. And he argues that we're about to experience exponential change because of these changes in computing power. And with a surreal picture of the white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland over his head, he told me literally that over the next 20 years, we're going to overcome almost all disease and aging. That's pretty remarkable stuff. Every tech conference I go to, there are visionaries predicting what's happening with artificial intelligence. I was just in Munich a few weeks ago, and there was a German guy from artificial intelligence predicting that all civilization and philosophy was poised to change, and AI will colonize the solar system and use the energy from the sun. And he said that within the next few years, we'll have a computer with the intelligence of a monkey. I actually have to say I found that really scary. Some of the AI guys do sort of jump. They seem quite normal for a while, and then they sort of go into Looney Tunes. But actually, again, for those in the press is getting obsessed by AI. Here's another data point. So again, a decade ago, there were 3,000 articles a year written about artificial intelligence. By 2014, there were over 13,000. Last year, there were over 32,000. This year, we're already on track for over 100,000 stories to be written about AI, not least from amazing developments like DeepMind's announcement recently about how they'd beaten a computer had beaten a live European human being at the game of Go. An amazing development 10 years earlier than many people predicted. But I just want to go back in time for history for a moment. I have a great piece from the New York Times, and it reads, "The Navy revealed the embryo of an electronic computer today that it expects will be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence." The headline related to an amazing device called the perceptron. And when do you think the article ran? Very nearly, 60 years ago. Front page article in the New York Times. And I haven't seen that. I haven't seen a running around computer from the Navy, unless they're hiding somewhere in this room. So is this new wave of innovation really different? I agree with my economist, Martin Wolf, who's a brilliant economics writer in the Financial Times. He's quite a good bah humbug economist. And he recently wrote, "Same as it ever was. why the techno-optimists are all wrong. He asked, are we likely to experience profound change over the next 2 decades? No, he said. He pointed out that the pace of real economic and social change has actually slowed in recent decades, not accelerated, even though we all feel like it's all happening, changing all the time. Instead, he said, we're living through an age of really slow and boring technological change compared with what our ancestors managed. The breakthroughs of early industrial revolutions created far bigger economic and social value with a far bigger impact on productivity. They changed our whole energy system. They changed our health system in the most dramatic ways through clean water. It led to drastic falls in child mortality, perhaps the single most beneficial social change of the past 2 centuries. Life expectancy, for example, rose twice as fast in the first half of the 20th century than in the second half. Vacuum cleaners and washing machines did more to liberate women, I think, than Twitter. The railroad, steamships, and the motor car annihilated the idea of distance. Electric lighting enabled people in dark northern Europe to move to much longer working days. And yes, of course, the internet, mobile phones, and 3D printing matter, but do they really compare with clean water, gas, and electricity on our society? Yes, driverless cars are important, but are they really more innovative than the arrival of the first cars? We may think change is rapid now, but think back to the 1880s, an astonishing decade. It saw the invention of electric light, the internal combustion engine, fresh running water in urban areas, the telephone, the phonograph, motion pictures, the arrival of light rail, the modern bicycle, the revolving door, not politically, the skyscraper, the electric lift, Coca-Cola, not all progress is great, and the ballpoint pen. And above all, it saw the arrival of the Financial Times, 1886. Bit older than IBM, thank you. So as the billionaire founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel, who I've also interviewed, wrote of these more recent inventions, we wanted flying cars, and we got 140 characters. So the digital revolution that we're living through may not actually be as influential as those in the past, but it still represents a moment of amazing opportunity for us and our society. I'm on the side of the optimists. Based on the lessons of history, we have been here before. Society has not only survived, but flourished and become even more diverse with new jobs being created and amazing new opportunities for the human imagination. Whether it be a filmmaker I just met who's making a virtual reality movie for Oculus Rift called Apocalypse Zombie Showcase, can't wait for that, or making drones for Amazon. So finally, I called my dad ahead of this speech. He was in the attic with his giant train set, trying to set the signals to run via his iPhone. So we may have come a long way from the Cold War, but I think that's a perfect image of man and machine in perfect harmony. Thank you very much.